2 weeks ago, I drove 4 hours to surprise my daughter and son-in-law. I thought I was bringing a homemade apple pie and a check for their anniversary. Instead, I ended up bringing a SWAT team. When I reached for the doorbell, my neighbor Larry sprinted across the lawn and tackled me into the hydrangeas. He did not say hello. He pressed his hand over my mouth and whispered 3 words that stopped my heart. "If you knock, they will kill her." 5 minutes later, I was watching my son-in-law get handcuffed on the lawn. But what the police found in the basement is something that still wakes me up screaming in the middle of the night. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever trusted the wrong person. My name is Douglas Carter. I am 72 years old, and I have spent 40 years building houses with my own 2 hands. I know a solid foundation when I see one, and I know when a structure is about to collapse. But I never guessed my own family was the thing that would crumble. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I pulled my beat-up Ford F-150 into the driveway of the colonial house I had bought for my daughter Natalie 3 years ago. The engine rattled as I turned it off, disrupting the perfect silence of the wealthy Seattle suburb. My wife Beatrice had come up here 3 days prior to help Natalie with the house. I decided to drive up early to surprise them. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, smoothing down my gray hair. I grabbed the apple pie from the passenger seat and stepped out. The air was cold. I walked up the concrete path admiring the solid oak door I had installed myself last Christmas. I had paid $2,000 for that door because I wanted my little girl to be safe. I was 3 steps away from the porch when I heard heavy breathing behind me. Before I could turn around, a hand clamped onto my shoulder with a grip like iron. I was shoved hard to the left. I stumbled, dropping the pie. The ceramic dish shattered on the pavement, sending apples and cinnamon everywhere. I was dragged forcefully behind the large hedge that separated Natalie's house from the neighbor's property. My instincts from my younger days kicked in. I swung my fist ready to fight this attacker. It was Larry. Larry was the 68-year-old ex-Marine who lived next door. We had hated each other for 5 years. He was the man who deliberately blew leaves onto my daughter's lawn and called the HOA every time I parked my truck on the street. I thought he was attacking me because of a property line dispute. I opened my mouth to yell at him to get his hands off me. But Larry did not look angry. He looked terrified. His face was pale and he was sweating despite the cold wind. He slammed his callous hand over my mouth, effectively silencing me. His eyes were wide and desperate. "Quiet, Douglas," he hissed into my ear. "Do not make a sound." I tried to push him off, thinking the old man had finally lost his mind. I pointed toward the front door, where my wife was supposed to be waiting. Larry grabbed my wrist and shook his head violently. "No," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Do not go in there. If you knock on that door, Beatrice is dead." I froze. The look in his eyes told me this was not a game. He pointed a trembling finger toward the basement window just above the ground level. "Look," he said, "just look." My knees sank into the damp mulch of the flower bed as I crawled toward the living room window. Larry remained behind me, his heavy breathing the only sound competing with the wind. My hands were shaking not from the cold, but from a terrifying cocktail of adrenaline and dread. I reached the sill and peered through the small gap between the velvet curtains I had paid for just last Thanksgiving. What I saw inside made my stomach turn over. The living room, usually pristine, looked like a crime scene. My son-in-law, Jason, was standing in the center of the room, his face twisted into a mask of rage I had never seen before. In his right hand, he gripped a yellow industrial box cutter, the blade extended fully. On the coffee table lay my wife's vintage leather suitcase. It was a piece we had bought together in Florence for our 40th anniversary, a symbol of our golden years. Jason plunged the blade into the fine leather, slashing it open with violent, jagged strokes. He wasn't just opening it, he was executing it. He ripped out the silk lining, throwing handfuls of my wife's neatly folded clothes onto the floor. I watched as he trampled on Beatrice's favorite blue cardigan with his muddy boots. My daughter Natalie was there too. But she wasn't crying. She wasn't trying to stop him. She was on her knees frantically rifling through the pile of shredded fabric, tossing her mother's personal effects aside like garbage. The window must have been unlatched because their voices drifted out to me shrill and clear. Jason stopped slashing for a second, breathing hard, his face red. He kicked the ruined suitcase across the room. "Where is it?" he screamed. Did the old hag swallow the safe code? The word hung in the air. Hag. He was talking about Beatrice, the woman who had knit him a scarf last Christmas, the woman who had defended him when I said he was lazy. I felt a growl rising in my throat, a primal sound of a father ready to kill, but the shock of my daughter's response paralyzed me. Natalie did not defend her mother. She didn't even look up from the pile of clothes. Her voice was cold, pragmatic, devoid of any warmth or humanity. "I do not know, Jason," she snapped back. "But you need to calm down. If she dies of hypothermia down in that basement, we lose the $2 million. We get nothing." The world tilted on its axis. Basement, hypothermia, $2 million. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together in my mind with the force of a sledgehammer. They weren't just being rude. They weren't just stealing. They were torturing my wife. They had locked Beatrice, a 70-year-old diabetic woman, with poor circulation, in an unheated basement in the middle of a Washington winter, all to extract a code for money that didn't even exist. I looked at my hands. They were clenched into fists so tight my knuckles were white. I was no longer a visitor. I was a witness to an attempted murder. My muscles coiled and I lunged toward the glass. My only thought was to shatter the pain and wrap my hands around Jason's throat. I wanted to tear him apart. But Larry did not let go. For a man pushing 70, he had the grip of a steel trap. He hooked his arm around my neck and dragged me back down into the dirt behind the freezing hydrangeas. "Let me go!" I snarled, thrashing against him like a wild animal. "My wife is in there. I am going to kill him." Larry shoved his phone into my face. The screen was lit up, displaying an active call to 911. The timer read 45 seconds. "I already called them, Douglas," he hissed, his voice ragged with fear and urgency. "They are 3 minutes out. Do you hear me? 3 minutes. If you go in there now, you are just an intruder. Jason will claim self-defense. He will shoot you, and then he will finish off Beatrice and make it look like an accident. You need the police to break that door down. You need witnesses. You need to be smart, not dead." I stopped struggling, but my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to protect my wife. I had built that house to keep her safe. I had laid the foundation and framed the walls, and now it had become her prison. I looked back through the gap in the curtains, and my blood ran cold. The situation inside had shifted from cruelty to something far more sinister. Jason had left the room for a moment and returned carrying a bright red plastic jerry can. I knew that can. It was the 5-gallon container I kept in the garage for the lawnmower. I knew exactly how heavy it was when full. Natalie stood up, her face pale. "What are you doing?" "Jason," she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "We just need to scare her, not burn the house down." Jason ignored her. He unscrewed the black cap, and the fumes must have hit the air because Natalie took a step back, covering her nose. "I am done waiting," he spat, his eyes wild with a manic energy. "If the cold does not make the old hag talk, maybe the smell of gasoline will." He wasn't just going to threaten her. He was preparing to turn the basement into an incinerator. The absolute horror of it paralyzed me. I imagined Beatrice down there in the dark, huddled on the concrete, smelling the gas seeping under the door, knowing she was trapped. I looked at Larry, pleading with my eyes, tears of rage blurring my vision. "They are going to burn her," I whispered, my voice breaking. "We cannot wait 3 minutes, Larry. She does not have 3 minutes." Wait, listen, Larry said, tilting his head toward the street. In the distance, carried on the biting winter wind, came the faint wailing of sirens. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. But inside the house, Jason was moving toward the basement door, swinging the heavy gas can with a sickening purpose. Time seemed to warp, slowing down to a crawl. I gripped a heavy river stone from the garden bed, my knuckles turning white. If he touches that doorknob, I am going in, police or no police. I will not let my wife burn. The sirens grew louder, cutting through the suburban silence, screaming that help was coming, but I feared it might be 30 seconds too late. The sudden explosion of blue and red lights against the living room window was the only warning they got. The driveway, which had been pitch black a moment before, was now bathed in the strobe effect of 3 patrol cars screeching to a halt. I did not wait for them to knock. I scrambled out of the bushes, my joints popping, and ran toward the front porch just as the lead officer kicked the door. The solid oak frame I had installed with such pride 3 years ago splintered with a deafening crack. The wood gave way, and the police swarmed into the hallway, their weapons drawn, shouting commands that echoed off the high ceilings. I followed them inside, my heart hammering in my throat, and what I saw made my blood boil hotter than the rage I had felt outside. The transformation was instant and terrifying. The moment Jason saw the uniforms, the monster who had been brandishing a gas can vanished. In his place stood a terrified, concerned son-in-law. He dropped to his knees, his hands raised in a gesture of helpless surrender. "Officer, thank God you are here," he shouted, his voice cracking with a manufactured panic that made me want to vomit. "My mother-in-law, she just vanished. We have been looking everywhere for her. We think she might have wandered off in the snow." Natalie was even worse. She threw herself at a female officer, gripping the woman's arm with frantic desperation. Her face was wet with tears that seemed to appear on command. "She has dementia," she sobbed. "She gets confused. Please, you have to find her before she freezes." I stepped out from behind the wall of uniformed backs. The air in the room shifted instantly. Jason's eyes went wide, his jaw dropping as if he had seen a ghost. He looked from me to the broken door and back to me. "Dad." Natalie stammered, her performance faltering for a split second. "What are you doing here?" I did not look at her. I walked straight up to Jason, getting so close I could smell the faint chemical stink of gasoline on his flannel shirt. I pointed a trembling finger at the narrow white door tucked under the staircase. "The door to the basement." "Open it," I commanded. My voice was low and steady, a direct contrast to their chaotic screaming. "Open the damn door, Jason." Jason scrambled to his feet, placing his body between the police and the basement entrance. His eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape that did not exist. "Doug, listen to me," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The latch is jammed. It is this old house. The humidity makes the wood swell. We tried to open it earlier to check if she was down there, but it is stuck tight. We need a locksmith." He was lying. I knew he was lying because I had lubricated that lock myself last summer. I turned to the police sergeant, a burly man who was looking at Jason with narrowing eyes. "He is lying," I said. "My wife is down there, and he was about to pour gasoline on her. Check behind the sofa for the red can." The sergeant did not hesitate. He signaled to his partner, a younger officer holding a heavy steel battering ram. "Move aside, sir," the sergeant ordered Jason. Jason hesitated for a fraction of a second, his arrogant mask slipping to reveal the coward underneath, but the look on the officer's face made him step back. The younger officer swung the ram. Metal collided with wood with a violent thud that shook the floorboards. 1 blow, 2 blows. On the 3rd strike, the lock shattered and the door swung open into the darkness. The heavy wooden door swung inward, revealing a darkness that seemed to swallow the light from the hallway. But before my eyes could adjust, the smell hit me like a physical blow. It was a thick, suffocating stench of stale urine, ammonia, and damp rot that made the young officer behind me gag and cover his mouth. It was the smell of a cage that had not been cleaned. The police sergeant clicked on his heavy flashlight, and the beam cut through the gloom, sweeping across the unfinished concrete floor. It illuminated rusted tools, old cardboard boxes, and finally, in the farthest, coldest corner of the room, a small, trembling shape. My heart stopped beating for a second. Beatrice was curled into a tight, fetal position on the bare, freezing concrete. There was no mattress, no blanket, not even a piece of cardboard to separate her frail body from the ice-cold floor. She was wearing only her thin cotton pajamas and one sock. As I scrambled down the wooden stairs, my knees crashing painfully onto the hard stone, I saw that her skin was the color of gray ash. Her lips, usually warm and smiling, were a terrifying shade of blue. She was shaking so violently that her teeth were chattering, with a sound that echoed off the stone walls like a rattle of death. I pulled her into my arms, trying to transfer my body heat to her, but she felt like a block of ice. Her body was rigid with cold. "Beatrice," I whispered, choking back a sob that threatened to tear my throat apart. "Beatrice, it is me. It is Douglas." Her eyelids fluttered open, but her eyes were glassy and unfocused, rolling back into her head. She did not recognize me. Her cracked, bleeding lips moved, forming a single word that shattered what was left of my soul. "Water," she wheezed. "Please, water." She was dehydrated. They had not just locked her up, they had denied her basic human needs. Before I could scream for a medic, I felt a rush of air beside me. It was Natalie. My daughter threw herself onto the filthy floor, pushing me aside with surprising strength. The performance she delivered in that moment was so evil and so convincing that it made my blood freeze. "Oh, Mommy," she wailed, her voice pitching up into a hysterical sob that sounded heartbreakingly real to everyone but me. "Oh my God. Why did you do this? Why did you come down here? We told you to stay in your room." She stroked Beatrice's matted hair far with one hand, while looking back at the police officers with wide, tear-filled eyes, ensuring they witnessed her distress. "She is so confused, officer," she sobbed, burying her face in her mother's neck. "We set up a beautiful room for her upstairs, but she keeps wandering off and hiding in these strange places. We were so scared. We thought she had walked out into the snow." I stared at my daughter, unable to breathe. The lie was so smooth, so practiced. She was holding the mother she had just tried to freeze to death and blaming the victim for her own torture. At the top of the stairs, Jason shook his head with a look of fake exhaustion and said loud enough for the sergeant to hear, "See, officer, this is what we deal with every day. The dementia is getting dangerous. We need to put her in a home for her own safety." I tried to climb into the back of the ambulance, holding my wife's freezing hand, but a heavy arm barred my path. It was Jason. The fear that had consumed him moments ago was gone, replaced by a sickening professional calm. He was holding a thick manila folder which he thrust into the hands of the police sergeant. "Officer, before you listen to him, you need to see this," Jason said, his voice steady and reasonable. "These are Beatrice's medical records. She was diagnosed with severe early-onset dementia 3 months ago. She has a history of wandering off and self-harm." I stared at him in disbelief. My wife did not have dementia. We had completed the Sunday crossword puzzle together just last week. She was sharper than I was. "That is a lie," I shouted, trying to push past him. "She is perfectly sane. You locked her in a dungeon." The sergeant looked from me to the paperwork, and I saw the doubt creep into his eyes. He flipped through the documents which looked official, stamped with medical logos and signatures. Jason lowered his voice to a tone of fake sympathy. "We did not want to lock the door, officer. But last week she tried to walk into traffic. The basement was the only room with a secure lock until we could get the windows upstairs child-proofed. We were trying to protect her from herself. It was a masterclass in manipulation. He had turned their torture chamber into a safety measure." I turned to the sergeant, desperation clawing at my throat. "Check the cameras," I pleaded, pointing to the high-tech security lenses mounted in the hallway corners. "I paid for those myself. They record everything. If she walked down there herself, the video will prove it. But if they dragged her down there, you have your proof." The sergeant looked at Jason, waiting for an answer. Jason did not even blink. "I wish we could," he said, shaking his head with feigned regret. "The system has been offline since the storm last Thursday. We have been waiting for the technician." The sergeant sighed, closing the folder. He looked at me with pity, not for my situation, but for what he thought was my denial. "Sir, without video evidence or physical signs of assault that predate this incident, I cannot arrest them. This appears to be a medical situation, not a criminal one. We are taking her to the hospital for observation. You can file a report there." He was letting them go. The law, which I had respected my whole life, was walking away, leaving the monsters standing in the warmth of the home I bought them. As the ambulance doors slammed shut, cutting off my view of Beatrice's pale face, I looked back at the house. The police were walking back to their cars, filing away their notepads. Jason stood on the porch behind the sergeant's back. He wasn't looking at the police. He was looking directly at me. And then he did something that chilled me more than the winter wind. He smiled. It was a small, cold smirk of absolute victory. He tapped his temple with his index finger, mouthing the words, "She is crazy." In that moment, as the sirens wailed into the night, I realized the police could not save us. The law was blind to this kind of evil. If I wanted to save my wife and get justice, I would have to stop being a father and start being the hunter they never expected. The fluorescent lights of the emergency room hummed with a sound that drilled into my skull, adding to the pounding headache behind my eyes. Dr. Evans stood at the foot of the bed, holding a clipboard that contained the empirical evidence of my failure as a protector. He was a young man with tired eyes, and he did not look at me with sympathy. He looked at me with accusation. "Mr. Carter," he said, his voice low and clinical, "your wife is not just confused or suffering from dementia. Her blood sugar levels are critical. She is severely dehydrated and showing signs of prolonged malnutrition. We found linear bruising on her wrists that is consistent with restraints. This was not an accident, and it certainly was not self-inflicted." I opened my mouth to explain that I had just arrived, that I was the one who called for help, but the automatic doors slid open with a mechanical hiss that cut me off. They walked in like they were entering a board meeting rather than an intensive care unit. Natalie was clutching a designer tissue to her perfectly dry eyes, and Jason was already on his phone barking orders at someone about insurance coverage. When they saw the doctor, Jason hung up and instantly slid into his role as the concerned and capable son-in-law. "Doctor, thank God we made it," Jason said, striding forward with his hand extended, ignoring me completely. "I am her primary caregiver and power of attorney. We need to sign the release forms immediately. We have arranged for a private ambulance to take her to Serenity Hills. It is a specialized facility that knows her condition, and we do not want to distress her further with this chaotic hospital environment." The audacity took my breath away. Serenity Hills was a warehouse for the unwanted elderly, a place where people went to be forgotten. They wanted to move her to a place where they could control the narrative, where they could bury the truth under a pile of paperwork and sedatives. Dr. Evans looked from Jason to the frail, unconscious woman in the bed, and then back to Jason. I saw the hesitation in the doctor's posture. He was a man of medicine, not a judge. He did not know who was telling the truth, and Jason was waving legal terms around like weapons. Jason reached for the chart on the end of the bed. "We will take it from here," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. That was the moment the old Douglas died. The man who wanted to keep the peace, the man who just wanted to be a good father and a beloved grandfather, vanished. In his place stood the man who had poured concrete foundations for 40 years, the man who knew how to hold a line. I stepped between Jason and the bed. I did not shove him. I just occupied the space like a brick wall. I planted my work boots on the linoleum floor and crossed my arms over my chest. "You are not taking her anywhere," I said. My voice was not loud. It was a low rumble deep in my chest, like a generator starting up. You are not signing any papers. You are not speaking to any doctors. Jason laughed a short, nervous sound that bounced off the sterile walls. Doug, do not make a scene. You are tired. You are upset. You do not understand the medical complexities here. Let us handle this. I took a step forward, forcing him to take a step back. I am not tired, Jason. I am wide awake for the first time in 3 years. I looked at Natalie, who was hovering by the door, waiting for me to yield. I looked at her, and I tried to find the little girl I had taught to ride a bike, the girl I had built a treehouse for. She was gone. In her place was a stranger who viewed her mother as an obstacle to an inheritance. Leave, I said. If you take one more step toward this bed, I will finish what the police started. I am not your father anymore. I am the man who is going to make sure you pay for every single bruise on her arm. Get out before I make you get out. The silence in the hospital room was a heavy, suffocating blanket that settled over us after Jason and Natalie left. The only sound was the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor, a digital testament that my wife was still fighting to stay in this world. A nurse named Maria, a sturdy woman with kind eyes and hands that had seen too much pain, was gently cleaning the grime from Beatrice's skin. She moved with a reverence that brought tears to my eyes, treating my wife like a human being instead of the burden my children had made her out to be. I sat in the plastic chair in the corner, holding Beatrice's cold hand, waiting for her to wake up, waiting for a sign that the woman I had loved for 50 years was still in there. Maria moved to the foot of the bed to remove the filthy gray sock on Beatrice's left foot. It was stiff with dirt and dampness, a remnant of the dungeon they had kept her in. As Maria peeled the fabric away from the swollen purple bruised ankle, something small and white fluttered to the linoleum floor. It looked like a piece of trash, a scrap torn from the corner of a magazine page. Maria bent down to pick it up, her brow furrowing in confusion. "Mr. Carter," she said softly, handing it to me. "I think she was hiding this." I took the paper. It was no bigger than a matchbook, folded over 3 times until it was a tiny, hard square. My hands shook so badly I could barely unfold it. The paper was gritty with basement dust. Inside, written in what looked like a stolen eyeliner pencil, or perhaps a piece of charcoal found on the floor, were words scrawled in a frantic, jagged script. It was my wife's handwriting, but it looked like the writing of a terrified stranger writing in the dark. Douglas Run. House sold. Forged signatures. Do not trust Natalie. The air left my lungs. I read it again. And then a third time. The words burned into my retinas. Run. House sold. Forged signatures. The horror of the situation expanded instantly, shifting from a case of physical abuse to a sophisticated, calculated dismantling of our entire lives. They had not just locked her up to get a safe code. That was just a distraction. They had kept her in that basement to keep her out of the way while they stole everything. I closed my eyes, and the image of my own home 4 hours away flashed in my mind. The house I had built with my own hands. The house where we raised Natalie. The house that was fully paid off and worth nearly $1 million. They had sold it. They had forged our signatures while Beatrice was freezing in a cellar and I was driving down the highway with an apple pie. The betrayal was absolute. Natalie was not just a bystander or a victim of a bad husband. The note said it clearly. Do not trust Natalie. My little girl was a co-conspirator in the destruction of her parents. I looked at Beatrice's unconscious face and a new kind of fire ignited in my gut. It was not the hot, explosive rage I had felt earlier. It was a cold, hard resolve. They thought they had won. They thought they had sold my house and broken my wife and that I was just a confused old man who would sign whatever papers they put in front of me. I folded the note and put it in my breast pocket, right next to my heart. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot, where Jason's expensive SUV had been parked. "You made a mistake, Jason," I whispered to the glass. "You left me alive, and now I know exactly what you took." The drive back to my own home was a 4-hour blur of white-knuckle terror. I did not stop for gas. I did not stop for food. I drove my truck like a man possessed, the engine screaming as I pushed it past 80 miles an hour on the icy interstate. The note from Beatrice's sock burned in my breast pocket like a brand. I kept telling myself it was impossible. You cannot just sell a house that doesn't belong to you. There are laws. There are title companies. There are identity checks. I repeated these facts to myself like a prayer, trying to keep the panic from seizing my heart. I pulled into my driveway just as the sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky in bruises of purple and gray. My house stood there, solid and reassuring. The brick facade I had laid with my own hands 30 years ago looked exactly the same. The oak tree I had planted when Natalie was born was still standing sentinel in the front yard. Relief washed over me, so powerful that my knees almost buckled as I stepped out of the truck. Beatrice was confused, I told myself. She was sick and scared, and she imagined the worst. The house was here. It was still mine. I walked up the porch steps, my keys jingling in my hand. I found the brass key, the one worn smooth by decades of use, and slid it into the lock. It went in an inch and then stopped. I frowned, wiggling it. It wouldn't turn. I pulled it out and tried again, jamming it harder. Nothing. It felt like the wrong key. But that was impossible. I looked at the deadbolt. It was shiny, newer than I remembered. A cold dread started to pool in my stomach. I pounded on the door with my fist. "Open up!" I shouted, my voice cracking. "Is anyone in there?" I expected silence. I expected an empty house. Instead, I heard heavy footsteps approaching from the other side. The door was unlocked from the inside and thrown open with violent force. I didn't see a face first. I saw the black metal barrel of a Remington shotgun pointed directly at my chest. Holding the gun was a man I had never seen before. He was big, wearing a bathrobe, and looking sleep-deprived and dangerous. "Get the hell off my porch," he growled, racking the slide of the shotgun. "I am counting to 3 and then I am calling the cops. Or shooting. Your choice." I raised my hands, my mind reeling. "This is my house," I yelled, the absurdity of the situation making me dizzy. "I am Douglas Carter. I live here. You are trespassing in my home. Put the gun down." The man didn't lower the weapon. He looked at me with a mixture of confusion and aggression. "Carter." He spat the name out. "You are the seller. You are supposed to be in Florida. The realtor said you moved down south last week." "I am not in Florida," I screamed. "I have never been to Florida. This is my house. I built it." The man lowered the gun slightly, sensing that I wasn't a burglar, but he didn't invite me in. He reached onto the hallway table and grabbed a thick stack of stapled papers. He threw them onto the porch mat at my feet. "Read it and weep, pal," he said. "I bought this place fair and square 3 days ago. Cash deal. Quick close." I fell to my knees and picked up the document. It was a standard real estate purchase agreement. My eyes scanned the pages frantically until they landed on the price. $600,000. My heart stopped. This house was appraised at $850,000 last year. They had sold it for a fire sale price to move it fast, to get the cash before anyone asked questions. And then I saw the bottom of the page. There in blue ink were the signatures. Douglas Carter. Beatrice Carter. They were good forgeries, shaky enough to look like old age had set in, but firm enough to pass a notary's glance. They had signed away 40 years of my life for a quick payout. I looked up at the stranger, tears of rage blurring my vision. "This is a lie," I whispered. "These signatures are fake. My wife was in a basement in Seattle when this was signed." The man stepped back and started to close the door. "Look, buddy," he said, his voice hardening. "That sounds like a you problem. I have the deed. I have the keys. And I have a gun. Get off my property before I defend it." The heavy door slammed shut, and the new deadbolt clicked into place. I was standing on my own welcome mat, homeless, while a stranger drank coffee in my kitchen. They hadn't just stolen my money. They had erased my existence. I drove 3 miles down the interstate to a roadside motel with a flickering neon sign that buzzed like a dying fly. My hands were still shaking from the encounter at my own front door, but I needed rest. I needed to think. I walked into the lobby, which smelled of stale cigarettes and lemon floor cleaner, and slapped my credit card on the counter. "A room for the night," I told the clerk, a bored teenager who barely looked up from his phone. "Just give me a bed." He ran the card. The machine beeped a harsh, dissonant tone that sounded like a rejection. He frowned and ran it again. Same sound. "Declined," the kid said, sliding the card back to me. "It says card reported lost or stolen. You got another form of payment, old-timer." I stared at the plastic rectangle in my hand. It was not lost. It was right here. And then the realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Jason. He had not just sold my house. He had called the bank pretending to be me, or using the power of attorney I never knew I signed to report my cards missing. He had frozen my assets. He had cut my supply lines. I patted my pockets. I had $40 in cash and a quarter tank of gas. I walked out of the lobby feeling the eyes of the clerk burning into my back. I was a millionaire on paper, but tonight I was a homeless man. I drove the truck behind an abandoned gas station to avoid the police patrols. I reclined the driver's seat and pulled an old mover's blanket from the back. It smelled of motor oil and sawdust, the smell of my work, but tonight it was the only thing standing between me and hypothermia. As the temperature inside the cab dropped and my breath began to mist in the air, my mind drifted back to a warm afternoon 2 years ago. I was sitting at the kitchen table with Natalie. She had made me coffee. She was holding my hand, her thumb stroking my knuckles with a tenderness that made my heart ache with love. "Dad," she had said, her eyes wide and wet with concern. "Mom is getting forgetful, and you are working too hard. What if something happens? What if you have a stroke and cannot sign the checks for Mom's insulin? Put my name on the checking account, just as a backup, so I can take care of you both if the worst happens." I remembered how touched I was. I remembered thinking I had raised such a thoughtful, caring daughter. I remembered signing the bank forms, feeling a sense of relief that I had a safety net. I lay there in the dark, freezing truck and laughed a dry, bitter sound that hurt my throat. It was not a safety net. It was a trapdoor. She had not been worrying about my health. She had been worrying about how fast she could drain me dry. That conversation was not about love, it was about access. She had played the long game, grooming me for this exact moment. I pulled the oily blanket tighter around my shoulders, shivering violently. The cold seeping into my bones was painful, but it was nothing compared to the agony of hindsight. I had invited the thief into my vault and thanked her for robbing me. I closed my eyes, but I did not sleep. I spent the night staring at the roof of the truck, counting every beat of my heart, and fueling the fire of my revenge with every shiver. They thought freezing my money would stop me. They forgot that a man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous man on earth. I waited for Marcus Fairbanks at a booth in the back of a 24-hour diner near the industrial district. I looked like a vagrant with my unshaven face and rumpled clothes, but the waitress kept refilling my black coffee because she recognized the look of a man who had nowhere else to go. When Marcus walked in, he drew stares. He was wearing a $3,000 Italian suit that looked violently out of place among the grease stains and trucker hats. Marcus was an old friend from high school who had chosen law school while I chose the construction site. We had taken different paths, but we shared the same code of loyalty. He slid into the booth opposite me, and for a moment he just looked at me with a mixture of heartbreak and fury. He did not waste time with small talk. He placed a heavy manila envelope on the sticky table between us. His voice was low, barely a whisper over the clatter of silverware. "I pulled the favors you asked for, Douglas," he said, "and it is worse than we thought. Your son-in-law is not just a bad real estate agent. He is a degenerate gambler." I opened the envelope. Inside were printouts of bank transfers, screenshots of text messages, and a dossier on an illegal gambling ring operating out of a warehouse in downtown Seattle. Marcus pointed to a figure circled in red ink. $148,000. That is what Jason owes. It started with fantasy football leagues, then moved to high-stakes online poker, and finally to underground tables run by the Russian mob. He has been chasing his losses for 2 years, and he ran out of road 3 days ago. I stared at the number. It was a fortune. It was enough to ruin a life. And it was exactly why they had targeted Beatrice and me. Marcus leaned in closer, his eyes serious. "My contact in the Vice Squad says Jason has a deadline. This Friday. That is tomorrow, Douglas. If he does not come up with at least 50% of the debt by midnight on Friday, the people he owes are going to stop asking politely. They are going to start breaking bones. That explains the house sale. That explains why they sold your $800,000 home for $600,000 in cash. They did not care about the market value. They just needed liquid cash fast enough to save Jason's life." It all clicked into place. The desperation, the violence, the attempt to freeze Beatrice to death to get a safe code. They were not acting out of simple greed. They were acting out of terror. They were cornered rats biting everything in sight. I looked at the photos of Jason leaving a betting parlor looking sweaty and manic. A strange calm settled over me. Knowledge is power, and for the first time in 24 hours, I had the upper hand. I knew their timeline. I knew their motivation, and I knew exactly how desperate they were. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a burner phone. "Take this," he said. "Your phone is compromised. If you want to fight this legally, we can file an emergency injunction, but it will take time." I shook my head, pushing the legal documents back toward him. "We do not have time, Marcus. By the time a judge signs a paper, they will be in Mexico with my money." I stood up, picking up the burner phone. "I am not going to sue them, Marcus. I am going to help them pay their debt, but not with money. I am going to pay them with the one thing they gave me. Fear." Marcus slid a second folder across the grease-stained table, and the look in his eyes shifted from professional concern to deep personal pity. "You need to see this, Douglas," he said softly, "because you still think Natalie is a victim here. You still think she is just a wife trying to keep her husband happy. You are wrong." He flipped the folder open, revealing a copy of a property deed. It was the deed to the colonial house in Seattle, the one I had put a down payment on for Natalie's wedding gift. I looked at the document and felt the bile rise in my throat. The house was not just mortgaged. It was leveraged to the point of absurdity. There was a primary mortgage, a second mortgage, and a high-interest home equity line of credit that had been maxed out 3 months ago. Natalie had signed every single page. Her signature was not shaky or coerced. It was bold and clear right next to Jason's. She had turned the home I helped her build into a giant ATM machine, and they had drained it until it was dry. "They were not just broke," Douglas Marcus said, tapping the paper. "They are insolvent. They have negative equity. If the bank forecloses next week, which they will, they lose everything. The cars, the furniture, the reputation." But that was not the killing blow. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a travel itinerary printed on cheap copy paper. "This is why they needed your house sold for cash immediately," he said. "This is why they could not wait for a probate court or a proper listing." He pointed to the departure date. Saturday morning. 6:00 a.m. 2 tickets on Aeromexico. One way, Seattle to Cancun. The room seemed to spin. Saturday. That was 2 days away. They were not planning to put Beatrice in a nursing home. They were not planning to look after me. They were planning to take the $600,000 from my stolen house, pay off the Russian mob, to save Jason's kneecaps, and then vanish into the tropical sun, leaving us destitute and homeless in the Washington winter. They were going to leave my wife to rot in a state facility and leave me sleeping in my truck while they drank margaritas on a beach. It was a level of premeditated abandonment that shattered whatever piece of my heart was still holding on to fatherly love. Natalie knew. She knew about the flight. She knew about the debts. When she was crying in that basement, holding her mother, she was already mentally packing her bags. She had looked at her freezing, starving mother and seen nothing but a plane ticket. I picked up the itinerary, my fingers crinkling the paper. "They are not just thieves," I whispered, my voice sounding like grinding stones. "They are refugees from their own greed. They burned their life down, and now they are using my bones as kindling to keep warm." Marcus nodded slowly. "You have two options, Douglas. We can go to the police with this, but by the time the financial crimes unit unravels the shell companies Jason used, they will be in Mexico. Extradition takes years. Or you can do what you said. You can help them pay their debt." I looked at the departure time again. Saturday morning. That gave me 36 hours. 36 hours to turn their escape plan into a prison cell. I folded the paper and put it in my pocket next to Beatrice's note. "I am not going to the police, Marcus," I said, standing up. "The police are for people who want justice. I do not want justice. I want retribution. I am going back to Seattle, and I am going to give them a going-away party they will never forget." I sat in the cab of my truck watching Marcus drive away in his sleek sedan. The neon sign of the diner buzzed overhead, casting a sickly yellow light on the dashboard. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my old cell phone. I knew I should have left it off. Marcus had warned me that they could track the signal, but a part of me, a stupid sentimental part of me, hoped there might be a message from the hospital. Maybe a nurse telling me Beatrice had opened her eyes. I powered it on. The screen lit up with a barrage of notifications. Bank alerts, security warnings, and one voicemail. It was from Natalie. The timestamp was 10 minutes ago. My thumb hovered over the play button. I expected another tearful plea. I expected her to be begging me to come back to the hospital. I pressed play and held the phone to my ear. The voice that came through the speaker was not the voice of my little girl. It was the voice of a stranger, cold and impatient. "Jason, pick up the phone," she snapped. The background noise sounded like a department store, maybe a changing room. "Is the old man dead yet?" I stopped breathing. The air in the truck seemed to vanish. She continued, her tone dropping to a sinister hiss. "We are running out of time. The flight is in 48 hours. If he does not sign the pension release forms by tomorrow night, you need to handle him. Just do what you did to Mom. He is old. Nobody will ask questions if he has a heart attack." The message ended with a sharp click. I sat there in the silence, my hand gripping the phone so tight, I thought the screen would crack. I played it again, and then a third time. "Is the old man dead yet? Do what you did to Mom." It was not a figure of speech. It was an instruction. They were not just waiting for me to die. They were actively discussing how to end me. The hunger in her voice was not just for money anymore. It was a hunger to erase me, to wipe me off the earth so she could enjoy her margarita in peace. My daughter was plotting patricide. The realization hit me with the force of a physical punch to the gut. I leaned over the steering wheel, gasping for air, fighting the urge to vomit. All these years, I thought I was raising a princess. I thought I was building a legacy. Instead, I had raised a predator who viewed her parents as nothing more than obstacles between her and a payday. She had probably sent this to my old number by mistake, thinking she was leaving a message on Jason's voicemail. It was a slip of the tongue that had just saved my life. Fear evaporated. Sadness evaporated. In their place, a cold, hard resolve settled into my bones like concrete setting in a mold. I wiped the sweat from my forehead and looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. They wanted a heart attack. They wanted a dead old man. Well, I would give them a performance. I would give them exactly what they wanted, right up until the moment I took everything away. I picked up the burner phone Marcus had given me. I was not the prey anymore. I was the hunter, and the hunting season had just begun. Marcus looked at me across the scarred laminate table of the diner, his face illuminated by the harsh fluorescent lights. He was sketching a legal strategy on a yellow notepad, drawing lines and circles that represented injunctions, restraining orders, and asset freezes. He spoke with the confidence of a man who believed in the system, a man who thought that rules and statutes were enough to stop evil. "Douglas, we have a strong case," he said, tapping the paper with his expensive fountain pen. "We can file an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order by Monday morning. We can petition the court to freeze the sale of your house. It might take 6 months to a year to unravel the fraud, but we will get your property back." Monday morning. 6 months. A year. The words floated in the air like smoke utterly disconnected from the reality of the gun that had been pointed at my face or the woman freezing in a basement. Marcus did not understand. He was fighting a legal battle. I was fighting a war for survival. I looked at the travel itinerary in my hand. Saturday, 6 in the morning. That was the deadline. There was no Monday for us. If we waited for the courts, Jason and Natalie would be sipping tequila on a beach in Mexico, while the state buried my wife in a pauper's grave. I slammed my hand down on the table. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet diner. The silverware jumped and Marcus recoiled, dropping his pen. "No," I said, my voice shaking with a rage that had moved beyond shouting. "No judges, Marcus. No motions. No paper. You are talking about the law. These people do not care about the law. They sold my house with a fake signature. They tried to burn my wife alive. They are plotting to kill me for an insurance payout. You cannot fight wolves with a piece of paper. You have to shoot them." Marcus looked around the diner, checking if anyone had heard. "Douglas, you cannot take the law into your own hands," he whispered. "If you hurt them, you go to jail and they win. You need to be smart." "I am being smart," I replied, leaning in close. "I am not going to hurt them physically. I am not going to shoot them with a gun. I am going to use the only weapon they respect. I am going to use their own greed against them." I picked up the burner phone and the itinerary, holding them up like evidence. "They are desperate, Marcus. They are drowning in debt, and they are terrified of the mob. They need money more than they need air. If I offer them a way out, if I dangle a fortune in front of their faces, they will not look for the hook. They will bite. And when they do, I will be the one reeling them in." I stood up and grabbed my coat. The tired, beaten old man who had walked into the diner was gone. In his place was a contractor who knew that before you demolish a rotting building, you have to condemn it first. "I need you to back me up on this, Marcus," I said. "I am going to tell them a lie worth $2 million. I am going to give them a dream so big that they will walk right into a nightmare. I am going to play the role of the senile, helpless father one last time. And by the time they realize it is an act, it will be too late. Put your legal pad away, counselor. We are doing this the hard way." I stood in the cracked mirror of the truck stop bathroom, the fluorescent light buzzing overhead like an angry hornet. The man staring back at me looked too strong, too angry. That man would scare them off. That man would make Jason run for the Mexican border with the money he already had. I needed to become someone else. I needed to become the victim they wanted to see. I took my razor, the blade dull and rusted from days of neglect, and I didn't shave clean. I hacked at my beard. I left patches of gray stubble on my chin and a jagged cut on my cheek that oozed a drop of dark blood. I didn't wipe it away. Next came the clothes. I pulled my flannel shirt out of my duffel bag and tore a button off the collar. I rubbed the fabric against the dirty bathroom floor until it looked stained and neglected. I put it on, buttoning it wrong, skipping a loop so the hem hung unevenly. I looked at my reflection again. The strong, capable contractor was fading. In his place was a confused, disheveled old man who couldn't even dress himself. But the transformation wasn't complete. I needed to break my body. I took a small pebble from the parking lot outside and slipped it into my right boot, right under the heel. I took a step and a sharp shooting pain fired up my leg, forcing my knee to buckle. I gritted my teeth and took another step. The limp was real. The pain etched a genuine grimace onto my face. I practiced my walk in the empty parking lot, shuffling my feet, letting my shoulders slump forward as if the weight of the world had finally broken my spine. I let my mouth hang open slightly, slack-jawed, my eyes unfocused and wandering. I whispered to myself, practicing the tremor in my voice. "Beatrice," I mumbled. "Where is Beatrice?" I sounded pathetic. I sounded broken. It was perfect. I drove back to the house, my heart pounding a rhythm of cold, calculated vengeance. When I pulled into the driveway, I didn't park straight. I left the truck at an awkward angle, one wheel on the grass, the engine sputtering. I sat there for a moment, summoning the ghost of every confused, helpless, elderly man I had ever seen. I thought about the fear in Beatrice's eyes, the cold of that basement, and I used it. I didn't push the anger down. I transmuted it into grief. I let the tears come hot and stinging. By the time I opened the truck door and stumbled out, clutching a plastic bag of old clothes like a lifeline, Douglas the Avenger was hidden deep inside a shell of Douglas the dementia patient. I walked up the path, dragging my bad leg, my hands shaking visibly. I didn't ring the doorbell. I just stood there, staring at the wood, looking lost. When the door finally opened, it wasn't Jason or Natalie. It was the neighbor, Larry. He had been watching. He saw me, and his eyes widened in horror, not realizing it was an act. "Douglas," he whispered from across the hedge. "What happened to you?" I didn't answer him. I couldn't break character. The door swung fully open, and there stood Jason. He looked at me, at my stained shirt, my bleeding face, my trembling hands, and then the most satisfying thing happened. He didn't look scared. He looked relieved. He smiled that shark-like smile and stepped aside. "Come in, Dad," he said, his voice dripping with false sweetness. "We have been so worried about you. You look terrible. Let us take care of you." The trap was set. The wolf had just invited the hunter into the den. Here is the content for Section 16, written in English, designed for an emotional voiceover reading, without headers or special characters. I stood on the porch, staring at the welcome mat that I had bought them as a housewarming gift 3 years ago. The door swung open, and Jason filled the frame. He did not look happy to see me. His posture was aggressive, his chest puffed out, and for a moment I thought he was going to punch me right there in the open air. But I did not flinch. I did not stand tall. Instead, I let my shoulders collapse inward, shrinking my 6-foot frame until I looked like a withered husk of the man I used to be. I gripped the plastic bag of old clothes with both hands, my knuckles white, as if it were the only thing anchoring me to the earth. I forced my lower lip to tremble, a skill I had learned from watching my grandson cry when he dropped his ice cream. I looked up at Jason, not with anger, but with a watery, pleading gaze that begged for forgiveness. "Jason," I stammered, my voice cracking perfectly on the second syllable. "I do not know what happened. I think I am losing my mind, son. The police, they said I called them, but I do not remember dialing the numbers. I just wanted to see Beatrice." Is she here? I miss her so much. I let a single tear roll down my cheek, tracking through the dirt and stubble I had left on my face. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. To apologize to the man who had tried to incinerate my wife required a level of self-control that made my stomach churn with acid. But it worked. I saw the tension leave Jason's shoulders. The suspicion in his eyes was replaced by something far worse. It was pity mixed with a predator's delight. He looked me up and down, taking in my mismatched buttons and my shaking hands, and he realized he did not have to fight me. He just had to manage me. "Oh, Dad." "Come inside," Jason said, stepping back and opening the door wide. His voice dropped to that sickeningly sweet tone people use for toddlers and golden retrievers. "We were so worried about you. You were shouting some crazy things earlier. We knew it was just the stress. Come on, let us get you out of the cold." I shuffled into the hallway, dragging my right leg with a heavy, exaggerated limp. Natalie appeared at the top of the stairs. She was wearing a silk robe that probably cost more than my monthly pension check. When she saw me, she did not rush down to hug me. She paused, her eyes scanning me like a health inspector looking at a rat. But when she saw Jason give her a subtle nod, a quick wink that said playing along, she descended the stairs with a practiced smile plastered on her face. "Daddy," she cooed, reaching out to touch my arm with the very tips of her fingers, as if she were afraid my poverty might be contagious. "You look exhausted. Why don't you sit down in the living room? We were just saying how much we wanted to help you." I let them guide me to the sofa, the same sofa I had paid for. I sank into the cushions, letting my mouth hang open slightly. I watched them through my half-closed eyelids. Jason walked over to Natalie and wrapped his arm around her waist. They did not think I was looking. They exchanged a glance that I will never forget. It was a look of pure, unadulterated triumph. They smiled at each other, a wide, shark-like grin that said, "We won." They thought the old lion had lost his teeth. They thought I was a senile old fool who had wandered back into their trap to be fleeced one last time. "I am so sorry about the door," I mumbled, staring at the floor. "I will pay for it. I have money. I have lots of money saved up. I just want to help." At the mention of money, their heads snapped toward me in unison. The greed in the room was palpable, thick enough to taste. It was metallic and bitter. Jason sat down on the coffee table right in front of me, invading my personal space. "Do not worry about the door, Doug," he said, placing a hand on my knee. "We can fix the door. We just want to make sure you are okay. And your assets are safe. You know, with your memory going like this, you really shouldn't be managing your own finances anymore. It is dangerous." I looked at him and forced a weak, grateful smile. "You are right, Jason," I whispered. "I need help. I think I need to sign everything over to someone I trust." The trap snapped shut. They took the bait, hook, line, and sinker. Dinner that night was a masterclass in disrespect. They sat at the granite island eating takeout sushi from expensive plastic trays, while I was relegated to the corner of the table with a bowl of cold, leftover spaghetti. They did not offer me a glass for my water, just a plastic cup they usually gave to the gardener. I let my hand tremble as I tried to twirl the pasta on my fork, letting strands of sauce fall onto the placemat. I watched them ignore me. They were speaking in hushed tones about flight times and packing lists, completely erasing my presence from the room. I was just a piece of furniture to them, a broken old chair they were waiting to throw out. It was time to remind them that this chair was made of gold. I cleared my throat, a wet, rattling sound that made Natalie grimace in disgust. "I miss the house," I mumbled to my bowl. "I miss the oak tree." I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand, smearing a little sauce on my chin. "I need to go back there. I need to get the papers from the safe." Jason didn't even look up from his California roll. "The house is gone, Dad," he said, his voice bored and dismissive. "We told you. You sold it. Remember, it is not yours anymore. Eat your pasta." I shook my head slowly, staring at a spot on the wall. No, I whispered. No, I can buy it back. I have the money. I paused, letting the silence stretch for 3 seconds. It is a good thing I never touched the money from the stadium job. The trust fund. I think I hid it too well. Nobody knows about it. Not even the IRS. Jason stopped chewing. The room went deathly quiet. I continued rambling, pretending I was talking to myself. 1995. That was a good year. $2 million. It has just been sitting there growing interest. I should go to the bank. I should pull it out and buy the house back for Beatrice. The reaction was instantaneous and electric. Jason took a sip of his beer and it went down the wrong pipe. He started coughing violently, his face turning a deep shade of crimson as he pounded on his chest. He sputtered, choking on the liquid, and the realization simultaneously. Natalie did not move. She froze, her chopsticks hovering halfway to her mouth. Her eyes, which had been dull and annoyed a moment ago, suddenly snapped open wide and bright. They locked onto me with a laser-like intensity. It was the look of a starving wolf catching the scent of fresh blood. $2 million, she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. Dad, what are you talking about? What stadium job? I blinked rapidly, acting as if I had just realized they were listening. I looked scared. I shouldn't have said that. I muttered, shrinking back into my chair. It is a secret. Mom said not to tell anyone. It is for emergencies. The Sovereign Trust. I think that is the name. Jason wiped the beer from his chin and stood up. He walked around the island and sat in the chair next to me, pushing my pasta bowl aside. He leaned in so close I could smell the hops on his breath. His aggression was gone, replaced by a frantic, greedy desperation. Dad, he said, his voice shaking. Focus. This is important. You have $2 million in a trust fund. Since 1995. Are you sure? I looked at him and gave a slow, confused nod. I think so, I said. I was going to use it for retirement, but I forgot the account number. I only have the key to the safety deposit box. I patted my chest pocket. I think I can withdraw it, if I can just remember where the bank is. Natalie stood up and walked over to me, placing her hands on my shoulders. Her touch was warm now, possessive. She began to massage my neck, her fingers digging in slightly. Of course you can withdraw it, Daddy, she cooed. We can help you remember. We can help you get the money. We can buy the house back together. I looked down at my hands to hide the triumph in my eyes. They weren't going to Mexico on Saturday. Not anymore. I had just dangled a steak in front of 2 starving dogs, and they were going to stay right here until I fed them. The transformation was instant and sickening. It was like watching a snake shed its skin shone in real time. Jason did not just stand up, he practically leaped from his chair. He rushed to the mahogany liquor cabinet, the one I knew was stocked with bottles worth more than my truck. He bypassed the cheap stuff and reached for the Macallan 18-year-old single malt, a bottle he had screamed at me for touching last Christmas. He poured a generous measure into a crystal tumbler and walked back to me, his movements fluid and eager, like a waiter serving a king. Here, Dad, he said, placing the glass in my trembling hand. You look parched. Drink this. It will help you think. It will help with the memory. I took the glass, letting it rattle against my teeth as I took a sip. It burned, going down a rich, smoky fire that reminded me of better days. I watched Jason pull his chair closer, scraping the legs against the hardwood floor, until our knees were almost touching. The contempt was gone from his eyes, replaced by a frantic, hungry intensity. He pulled out his iPhone, his thumb hovering over the Notes app. So, Dad, he whispered, his voice trembling with suppressed adrenaline. Let us talk about 1995. The Sovereign Trust. Do you remember which bank holds it? Is it Chase? Is it Wells Fargo? We can look it up right now online. We can make sure it is safe. I squinted my eyes, looking past him at the ceiling fan spinning lazily above us. It was a big bank, I mumbled, slurping the scotch loudly to annoy him. It had a blue logo. Or maybe it was green. I remember the teller. Her name was Sally. She had a poodle. Or was it a terrier? I paused, taking another long, slow sip, while Jason looked ready to scream. He gripped my knee, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "Dad, forget the dog," he hissed, his patience fraying at the edges. "The account number. It would be on your old statements." "Did you keep them in the safe?" "The safe code." "Dad. Is it your birthday? Is it Mom's birthday? Think." I looked at him with wide, innocent eyes, playing the part of the confused geriatric to perfection. "I think I wrote it down," I said slowly, dragging out every syllable, "on a yellow piece of paper. But then I used it to wrap my chewing gum. Or maybe I put it in my shoe." I started to unlace my boot, my movements agonizingly slow. Jason let out a strangled sound, half groan, half growl. He was drowning. He had $148,000 of debt crushing his chest, and the only life raft was trapped inside the mind of a senile old man. He could not hit me. He could not drug me. Not yet. He needed me lucid enough to remember, but confused enough to sign. I saw the veins in his temple throbbing. He took a deep breath, forcing a smile that looked like a rictus of pain. "Take your time, Dad," he said through gritted teeth. "Take all the time you need. Just try to remember before tomorrow." I took another sip of the scotch and let out a long, dramatic sigh that seemed to rattle in my chest. I watched Jason's thumb hovering over the banking app on his phone, waiting for a number that I was never going to give him. It was time to pull the noose tight. I lowered the glass to the table with a heavy clunk and looked at them with wide, fearful eyes. I remember now, I said, my voice trembling. "I cannot just transfer it online. Mr. Henderson said it is impossible." Jason froze. "Who is Mr. Henderson?" he asked, his voice tight with suppressed panic. "Is he the banker?" I shook my head slowly. "No, he is the trustee. The lawyer who set up the fund in '95. He put in a clause. A safety clause. Because the amount is so big." I paused, letting them lean in closer. The air in the kitchen was thick with their greed. "I have to sign the release papers in person," I continued. "But not just anywhere. It has to be a public ceremony, with witnesses, to prove I am of sound mind and not being coerced." Natalie slammed her hand on the counter, making the sushi trays jump. "That is ridiculous," she snapped. "We can just get a notary. We do not need a ceremony." I shrank back into my chair, playing the part of the scolded child. "That is what the paper says," I whispered. "Mr. Henderson was very strict. If I do not follow the rules, the money goes to charity. The Red Cross gets it all." I saw the color drain from Jason's face. The thought of $2 million going to a charity instead of his gambling debts was physically painful to him. He ran a hand through his hair, pulling at the roots. "Okay, fine," he said, exhaling sharply. "We will take you to this Henderson guy tomorrow morning. We will sign the papers in his office." I shook my head again, more vigorously this time. "No," I said firmly. "It has to be here, in the house, to show I am buying it back. And I want a party." I looked at Natalie and smiled a goofy, senile smile. "A big party, princess, like your wedding. I want all of Jason's friends, all his business partners. I want them to see me give you the money. I want to be proud. If we do not have a party, I do not think I can sign. My hand is too shaky when I am sad." The room went silent. I could see the gears turning in their heads. They were doing the math. A party would cost money. It would take time. But $2 million was the prize. Jason looked at Natalie, and they had a silent conversation with their eyes. They were thinking about their flight to Mexico on Saturday morning. A party would mean missing the flight. It would mean staying in the country for another 24 hours. But the payout was too big to ignore. Jason turned to me, a fake smile plastered across his face that looked like it was hurting him. "Okay, Dad," he said, his voice slick with oil. "You want a party? We will give you a party. When do you want to do this?" I took a deep breath. "Saturday night," I said. "This Saturday. A big dinner, champagne, lobster, the works. Saturday, the day of their escape." I saw Jason flinch. He was thinking about the Russian mob. He was thinking about his kneecaps. But then he looked at the greedy glint in Natalie's eyes, and he made his choice. He decided that $2 million was worth the risk. He decided to cancel the flight. He decided to stay. "Perfect," he said. "Saturday night. We will invite everyone. It will be the night of our lives." He had no idea how right he was. It was going to be a night none of them would ever forget. Living in that house for the next 2 days was like sleeping inside a ticking bomb. I insisted on staying in the guest bedroom, claiming I was too confused to drive back to my truck. They agreed, not out of hospitality, but out of paranoia. They wanted to keep their $2 million lottery ticket under 24-hour surveillance. I spent most of the time sitting in a velvet armchair in the living room, staring at a blank television screen, pretending to doze off while my mind was racing with the precision of a tactical commander. I played the part of the invalid perfectly. I let my head loll to the side. I drooled a little. I fiddled constantly with the hearing aid in my left ear, complaining loudly that the battery was dying and that all I could hear was static. It was a lie, of course. The hearing aid was brand new, and I had the volume cranked up to maximum. It amplified every whisper, every rustle of clothing, every terrified breath they took. On Friday afternoon, I heard Jason pacing in the kitchen. He was on the phone, and his voice was a jagged edge of panic. "Listen to me," he hissed into the receiver. "Put the bat away. I told you I have the money. Saturday night. Yes, tomorrow. I am getting a cashier's check. 2 million. You will get your 150 grand plus interest. Just call off the dogs." I heard the sound of a heavy glass being slammed onto the granite countertop, followed by the terrified panting of a man who knows he is one mistake away from a funeral. He was not just negotiating debt, he was begging for his life. But the most chilling conversation happened that evening. Natalie and Jason were standing in the hallway just outside my door. They thought I was asleep. They thought I was deaf. I lay on the bed, my eyes closed, my breathing slow and rhythmic, while the hearing aid picked up their voices with crystal clarity. They were discussing my future. "Once he signs the transfer, how fast can we move him?" Jason asked, his voice low. "We cannot take him to Mexico. He will slow us down." Natalie's reply came without a second of hesitation. Her voice was cold, devoid of any daughterly affection. "I already called that state facility down in Tacoma," she said. "The one that accepts Medicaid pending applications. It is a dump. It smells like bleach and urine, but they have a bed open. We drop him off Sunday morning before we head to the airport. We tell them he is a ward of the state. By the time they figure out who he is, we will be on the beach." I lay there in the dark and felt a single tear slide out from under my eyelid. It was hot and salty, burning a trail down my cheek. They were not just stealing from me. They were discarding me. They were planning to dump their father, the man who had paid for their college, the man who had walked them down the aisle into a warehouse for the dying, just to save a few dollars on a plane ticket. The cheapest one. That was what I was worth to them. I gripped the sheets, my hands shaking not with age, but with a cold, focused fury. I wanted to get up and strangle them both, but I didn't. I forced my breathing to remain steady. I waited. Let them plan. Let them dream of the beach. Because tomorrow night I was going to turn their dream into a prison. Sunday morning was coming, but nobody was going to the airport. I waited until the house was silent, the heavy breathing of my daughter and son-in-law echoing from the master bedroom, before I made my move. It was 3 in the morning when I crept out the back door, my bare feet making no sound on the cold linoleum. I made my way to the gap in the hedge, the same spot where Larry had tackled me days ago. He was waiting for me. I did not have to call him. The old Marine had been sitting on his porch in the dark, watching the house like a sentry on guard duty. He saw my shadow and met me at the property line. We did not waste time with pleasantries. I told him everything in a hushed whisper. I told him about the fake trust fund, the $2 million lie, and the party scheduled for Saturday night. I told him about the nursing home in Tacoma and the plan to dump me like garbage. Larry listened, his jaw tightening until the muscles popped. When I finished, he spat on the ground, a glob of tobacco that hit the frozen earth with a slap. "We are going to bury them, Douglas," he growled. "But we need proof. Audio is good, but a jury needs to see the faces. They need to see the devil when he takes his mask off." He disappeared into his garage and returned with a heavy canvas tool bag. Inside was enough surveillance equipment to take down a cartel. High-definition micro-cameras, pinhole lenses, and long-range microphones. But we had a problem. We needed to get inside to install them without Jason noticing. Larry pulled a greasy pair of blue coveralls and a faded trucker hat from a hook. "Leave the door unlocked at 9 a.m., he said. "I am coming to fix the chandeliers." At 9 sharp, the doorbell rang. I was sitting at the kitchen table eating dry toast when Jason stomped to the door. "Who the hell is it?" he yelled, tearing the door open. Standing there was Larry, transformed. He was wearing the coveralls, his face smudged with grease, his eyes hidden behind thick safety glasses. He held a clipboard and looked every inch the grumpy, overworked electrician. "I am here for the lighting check," he barked, pushing past Jason before he could protest. "Old man Carter called me. Said you are having a big party. Said the wiring in this cheap McMansion would not hold up to the load." Jason looked at me furious. "Dad, what did you do?" I played the fool, shrugging my shoulders. "I just wanted the lights to be pretty, Jason. For the signing. I do not want the power to go out when I give you the money." The mention of the money worked like a charm. Jason deflated, waving his hand dismissively. "Fine, just make it quick. Do not break anything." For the next 3 hours, Larry moved through the house with the efficiency of a ghost. He installed a camera in the smoke detector above the dining table where the signing would happen. He hid a microphone in the floral centerpiece. He placed a lens in the bookshelf facing the living room sofa. I followed him around, pretending to be a nuisance, asking stupid questions, while actually blocking Jason's line of sight so Larry could work. We were a team. The contractor and the soldier, united by hatred for the people who thought they were smarter than us. By noon, the house was not just a home anymore. It was a television studio, and we were ready to film the season finale of Jason's destruction. I was pretending to nap in the armchair, my mouth slightly open, my chest rising and falling in a rhythmic cadence of deep sleep. But through my eyelashes, I was watching Natalie. She was standing by the coat rack in the hallway, rifling through the pockets of my old canvas barn jacket. She wasn't being subtle. She was digging for something, her hand diving into the lining like a raccoon searching for trash. Suddenly she stopped. She pulled out my battered leather wallet and flipped it open. Her fingers bypassed the photos of her own childhood and plucked out a small, crisp rectangle of cardstock. It was the business card Marcus Fairbanks had given me in the diner. The air in the room changed instantly. Natalie marched over to me, her heels clicking on the hardwood like gunshots. She kicked the footrest of the recliner, jarring me awake. I didn't have to pretend to be startled. The look in her eyes was genuinely terrifying. "Who is Marcus Fairbanks?" she demanded, holding the card inches from my nose. "This is a high-end litigation firm in downtown Seattle. Why do you have the card of a criminal defense attorney in your wallet, Dad?" My heart hammered against my ribs. If she knew I had a lawyer, the whole charade would collapse. She would know I wasn't senile. She would know I was plotting. I rubbed my eyes, feigning grogginess while my brain scrambled for a lie that would hold water. Fairbanks, I mumbled, squinting at the card. Oh, the money man. That is the man who took over for Mr. Henderson. Natalie froze. Henderson, the trustee. I nodded, yawning widely to cover my panic. Yes, Henderson retired, went to Florida to play golf. Fairbanks is the new guy. He has the keys to the vault. He is the one coming to the party tomorrow to bring the papers. Why do you have his card? Did you call him Natalie? Didn't answer. She looked at the card, then at me, weighing the probability of my truth. The greed was warring with her paranoia. She pulled out her phone and dialed the number on the card. I stopped breathing. I had texted Marcus earlier to be ready for anything, but I didn't know if he would pick up or if he would understand the specific role I had just cast him in. The phone rang once, twice. Then a voice smooth as silk and sharp as a razor answered on speakerphone. Law offices of Marcus Fairbanks. Natalie put on her best professional voice, the one she used to charm managers into giving her refunds she didn't deserve. Hi, Mr. Fairbanks. This is Natalie Carter. I am Douglas Carter's daughter. I found your card in my father's wallet. I was just calling to confirm the details for the signing ceremony tomorrow night, regarding the sovereign trust. There was a pause on the other end, a pause that lasted 3 heartbeats. It was long enough for me to visualize my own funeral. Then Marcus spoke, and I could hear the smile in his voice. Ah, yes, Mrs. Carter. A pleasure to finally speak with you. Your father speaks very highly of you. Yes, everything is prepared. I have the cashier's check for $2 million drafted and ready for transfer upon signature. I will be arriving at 7 o'clock sharp. Please ensure your father has his identification ready. Natalie let out a breath she had been holding, her shoulders sagging with relief. Of course, she said, her voice dripping with honey. We are so excited to see you. Thank you, Mr. Fairbanks. She hung up and looked at me with a newfound respect. She tucked the card back into my wallet and patted my hand. Good job, Dad, she said. You really did pick a top-tier firm. I just wanted to make sure. I closed my eyes and let my head drop back against the cushion, hiding the sheer terror that was slowly draining from my body. We were still in the game. The pounding on the front door began at 2:14 in the morning, and it sounded like someone was taking a sledgehammer to the frame. The house shook with every blow, waking me from a light doze. I did not need to guess who it was. Friends do not visit at 2 in the morning. Even the police would ring the bell. This was the heavy rhythmic knocking of men who are used to breaking things. I heard Jason scramble out of the master bedroom across the hall. He did not sound angry like he had with the electrician. He sounded frantic. I heard him hiss at Natalie to stay in bed and lock the door. Then I heard his bare feet slapping against the hardwood stairs as he ran to stop the noise before it woke the neighbors. I slipped out of bed and moved to the window that overlooked the front porch. The frost on the glass made it hard to see, but I used my sleeve to wipe a small, clear circle. Below me, the porch light flickered, casting long, jagged shadows across the driveway. 2 men stood there. They were not wearing masks. They did not need to. They were huge, wearing thick leather jackets that bulked out their shoulders, and they stood with the casual arrogance of predators who know the prey has nowhere to run. When Jason opened the door, he did not even get a word out. The taller man reached inside, grabbed Jason by the collar of his expensive silk pajamas, and yanked him out onto the freezing concrete. I pulled out the burner phone Marcus had given me and pressed record. The camera zoomed in, capturing the scene in grainy but undeniable detail. Jason was shivering violently, partly from the biting wind, but mostly from terror. Please, he whimpered, his hands raised in surrender. I told you, Saturday. I will have it Saturday night. The shorter man stepped forward and kicked Jason hard behind the knee. Jason crumpled, instantly dropping to the pavement. He did not try to stand up. He stayed on his knees, his head bowed like a condemned man awaiting the executioner's sword. It was a pathetic sight. The arrogant man who had sneered at my clothes and mocked my intelligence was now groveling at the feet of a common thug. "Listen to me, you weasel," the tall man said, his voice low, but carrying clearly in the silent night. "We are done with extensions. We are done with excuses. Yuri wants his money. 150 large. If we do not have it in hand by midnight on Saturday, we are not coming back to talk. We are coming back to take a piece of you. Maybe a finger, maybe a kneecap. Do you understand?" "I understand." Jason sobbed, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the snot running from his nose. "My father-in-law is signing the trust fund over tomorrow. $2 million. I will have it all. I swear on my life." I zoomed in on his face. This was the insurance policy I needed. This was the proof that the money he was trying to steal from me was already spent. He had sold my life's work to save his own skin. The tall man leaned down and patted Jason on the cheek. It was a gentle gesture that was somehow more terrifying than a punch. "Good," the man said. "Do not disappoint us, Jason. You know what happens to people who disappoint Yuri." They turned and walked back to a black sedan idling at the curb, leaving Jason kneeling on the porch in the freezing cold. I stopped the recording and saved the file. I watched him stay there for a long time, weeping into his hands. I should have felt pity. I should have felt the instinct to protect a member of my family. But as I looked at him, all I could see was the man who had locked my wife in a basement. I felt nothing but a cold, grim satisfaction. He was on his knees now, and if everything went according to plan, he would never stand tall again. By Friday afternoon, the house had transformed into a staging ground for a royal coronation. The doorbell rang incessantly as delivery trucks backed into the driveway one after another, unloading crates of expensive wine towering floral arrangements of white orchids and boxes of crystal stemware. I sat in my armchair, watching the spectacle with a knot of disgust tightening in my stomach. Jason was terrified of losing his kneecaps to the mob, but Natalie was operating in a different reality entirely. She was high on the fumes of the $2 million she thought she was about to receive. She wasn't just counting her chickens before they hatched. She was roasting them on a spit made of gold. She swept into the living room carrying a garment bag with the logo of the most expensive boutique in downtown Seattle. Her face was flushed with the manic energy of a shopping addict who has just found a new vein to tap. She did not look like a woman whose husband had been groveling on the porch 12 hours earlier. She looked like a lottery winner. She unzipped the bag with a dramatic flourish, revealing a floor-length gown covered in silver sequins that caught the light like broken glass. "Look, Daddy," she squealed, holding the dress up against her body. "It is for the ceremony tomorrow. I want to look professional when I accept the role of trustee." I looked at the price tag dangling from the sleeve. $5,000. I knew for a fact that her credit cards were already screaming in agony. She must have opened a high-interest emergency line of credit, or perhaps she had pawned her wedding ring. It didn't matter to her. In her mind, the check from Marcus Fairbanks was already in the bank. She was spending my money before the ink was even on the paper. I pulled on my earlobe, feigning a look of confusion. "That is a lot of sparkles, sweetheart," I mumbled. "Is it expensive?" She laughed, a harsh sound that lacked any real joy. "It is an investment, Daddy." She reached into her purse and pulled out a fistful of crumpled receipts. She threw them onto my lap like she was feeding a pigeon in the park. "Look at this. $10,000 for the catering. Only the best lobster and Wagyu beef. Another $3,000 for the string quartet. I am doing this all for you. I want your friends and Jason's partners to see how much we respect you. I want this to be a send-off worthy of your legacy." I picked up the receipts. My hands shook not from age but from the sheer audacity of her lie. A send-off. That was exactly what this was. She wasn't throwing a party to honor me. She was throwing a victory lap for herself. She was fattening the calf before the slaughter. She wanted the world to see a loving daughter celebrating her father, so that when they dumped me in a state-run facility the next morning, nobody would suspect a thing. I looked up at her at the greed shining in her eyes, and I forced a smile onto my face. "Thank you, Natalie," I whispered. "You are such a good girl. You always take care of me." She patted my cheek, her long fingernails scraping against my skin. "Of course I do, Daddy. Now get some rest. We have a big day tomorrow." She turned and walked away, the silver dress swishing behind her. I watched her go, clutching the receipts in my hand. She had spent $15,000 of borrowed money to impress a room full of strangers. She had dug the hole of their debt so deep that they would never be able to climb out. She thought she was buying respect, but she was just buying the rope I was going to hang them with. The burner phone in my pocket buzzed against my hip like an angry hornet. I was in the bathroom splashing cold water on my face, washing away the shame of the day. I checked the screen. It was a message from Larry sent via an encrypted app. The text was short: "Watch immediately." I clicked play on the video file. The grainy black and white footage from the camera Larry had installed in the smoke detector showed the kitchen island. It was time-stamped 5 minutes ago. Jason stood there stirring a pot of tomato basil soup. He looked over his shoulder, checking for witnesses, ensuring Natalie was out of the room. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out an orange prescription bottle. He didn't just take one pill. He uncapped the bottle and poured 4 or 5 blue tablets onto the granite counter. He used the bottom of a heavy glass to crush them into a fine powder. He swept the blue dust into a single bowl. My bowl. He stirred it vigorously, watching the powder dissolve into the red liquid. He wasn't seasoning my dinner. He was preparing a chemical straitjacket. 2 minutes later, a soft knock came at the guest room door. I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to stop my hands from trembling with rage. "Come in," I croaked, making my voice sound weak and reedy. Jason entered carrying a silver tray. The bowl of soup steamed, smelling of basil and cream, but to me it smelled like betrayal. "Here you go, Dad," he said, his voice dripping with synthetic concern. "Natalie thought you needed something warm. It will help you sleep before the big day. We want you rested and sharp for the signing." I took the tray, my fingers brushing against his. His skin was warm. He was smiling. It was the smile of an executioner offering a final meal. "Thank you, son," I whispered. "You are too good to me." I waited until the door clicked shut. I waited another 10 seconds for his footsteps to fade down the hall. Then I moved with the speed of a man 30 years younger. I couldn't flush it down the toilet because the noise of the plumbing might alert them. I couldn't throw it out the window because of the security screens. In the corner of the room stood a large potted ficus tree. It was healthy and green, standing about 4 feet tall. I knelt beside it and poured the thick red liquid into the soil, burying the evidence under a layer of decorative moss. I scraped the bowl clean with a tissue to make it look like I had licked it dry. Then I lay back in bed, feigning deep, heavy breathing. When Jason came back 20 minutes later to collect the tray, he looked at the empty bowl and grinned. "Good night, Dad," he whispered. "Sleep tight." When the sun came up the next morning, I looked at the corner. The ficus tree was dead. The leaves had turned a sickly brown and curled in on themselves as if they had been scorched by an invisible fire. They littered the floor around the pot, like confetti at a funeral. The chemical load in that soup was enough to kill a hardy plant in 6 hours. I stared at the withered leaves and felt a cold shiver run down my spine. That was supposed to be my brain. They didn't just want me compliant for the signing. They wanted me lobotomized so I wouldn't struggle when they dumped me at the state asylum. I swept the leaves under the bed. The tree had died so I could live to fight. The house was a hive of activity, a chaotic symphony of greed in motion. Caterers were shouting orders in the hallway, florists were dropping crystal vases on the hardwood, and Natalie was screaming at a terrified personal assistant about the shade of the napkins. In the middle of this hurricane, the iPad controlling the digital guest list sat unguarded on the kitchen island. It was glowing a beacon of opportunity. I waited until Natalie stormed off to the dining room to inspect the lobster bisque, and Jason stepped out onto the patio to smoke a cigarette and calm his frayed nerves. I moved to the counter, my heart racing, not with fear, but with the thrill of the sabotage. I unlocked the screen with a swipe of my finger. The invitation app was open. The Carter family celebration. It looked pretentious and tacky, exactly like them. I scanned the list. It was full of Jason's drinking buddies, low-level gambling associates, and people he wanted to borrow money from. I didn't delete a single one. I wanted his friends to be there. I wanted an audience for the destruction. But a trial needs a jury, and a crime needs witnesses. My fingers flew across the glass screen. First, I added Sheriff Mike. Mike wasn't just the local law. He was my fishing buddy from 30 years ago. He knew the difference between a bad man and a desperate one. I sent him a personal note attached to the invite signed as Jason. Security required. VIP event. Please come in uniform. Mike would know something was wrong the moment he saw me, but his presence would ensure that when the handcuffs came out, they would be clicked on by a steady hand. Next, I added the names that made my hands tremble with righteous anger. The Millers. The young couple who had bought my house 3 days ago. The people who had pointed a shotgun at me on my own porch. I found their email in Jason's contacts under quick cash sale. I invited them as guests of honor, telling them the seller wanted to officially hand over the keys in a ceremony. They would come expecting champagne. They would leave knowing they had purchased stolen property. Finally, I went through Jason's blocked list on his email. It was a graveyard of burnt bridges. Former clients he had swindled. Contractors he hadn't paid. I selected the angriest ones, the ones who had threatened lawsuits in the past month. I sent them all invites with a simple message. Full repayment and settlement will be discussed at the party. I hit send. The digital pigeons were loose. 20 new invitations flew out into the cyber world. I deleted the sent history and wiped my fingerprints off the screen with my sleeve. I shuffled back to my armchair just as Jason walked back in, smelling of tobacco and fear. He glanced at the iPad, saw the guest count had gone up, and smiled. He thought his popularity was growing. He thought the town was coming to celebrate his success. He didn't realize that I hadn't just padded the guest list. I had summoned a firing squad. The party was no longer a celebration. It was a courtroom, and the judge, jury, and executioners were all RSVPing yes. The hospital corridor was a tunnel of silence, broken only by the hum of ventilation and the squeak of my rubber-soled boots on the linoleum. I had to bribe the night orderly $20 to look the other way so I could slip into room 304 past visiting hours. I needed to see her. I needed to know that the reason I was fighting this war was still waiting for me on the other side. When I pushed the heavy door open, the room was bathed in the soft blue glow of the monitors. I expected to find her sleeping, sedated by the trauma of the last week. Instead, I found her awake. Beatrice was propped up against the pillows, her silver hair brushed back from her forehead. The color had returned to her cheeks, chasing away the gray pallor of the basement. But it was her eyes that stopped me in my tracks. They were not the glassy, vacant eyes of the dementia patient Jason claimed she was. They were sharp, clear, and burning with a blue fire I hadn't seen in years. She looked at me, and for the first time in days, she smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was a warrior's smile. "Douglas," she whispered, her voice raspy but steady. "I knew you would come." I rushed to the bedside, burying my face in her hands. They were warm now. The ice of that dungeon had finally melted. I told her everything. I whispered the details of my plan into the quiet room. I told her about the fake trust fund, the $2 million lie, and the trap I had set for Saturday night. I told her about the dead ficus tree and the camera in the smoke detector. I told her that I had invited the sheriff and the people who bought our house. I expected her to be afraid. I expected her to tell me to stop, to just take the loss and run away to a small apartment somewhere safe. Beatrice had always been the peacemaker, the one who smoothed over arguments and forgave insults. But the woman in the bed was done with peace. She listened, her grip on my hand tightening with every revelation. When I finished, she did not pull away. She sat up straighter, wincing slightly as the IV line pulled at her skin. "I am coming with you," she said. Her voice was not a request. It was a command. "I want to be there, Douglas. I want to be at that party." I shook my head, trying to gently push her back against the pillows. "No, Beatrice," I said. "It is too dangerous. Jason is desperate. If he sees you, he might snap. You are safe here. Let me handle the dirty work. You just rest." She looked at me with a ferocity that made me feel like the young man who had fallen in love with her 50 years ago. "They locked me in a basement, Douglas," she hissed. "They treated me like a dog. They made me beg for water in the house I helped pay for. They took my dignity. I am not going to let you have all the fun of taking it back. I want to see his face. I want to see the moment he realizes he has lost everything. I want to look him in the eye when the handcuffs go on." I looked at my wife. She was bruised, frail, and exhausted, but her spirit was made of iron. I realized I couldn't deny her this. This wasn't just my revenge. It was hers. I kissed her knuckles and nodded. "Okay," I said. "I will come get you at 5. We will walk in together. We will finish this together." She squeezed my hand, and for a moment we weren't two old victims. We were partners in crime, preparing to pull off the greatest heist of our lives. We were stealing our lives back. The sun rose over Seattle on Saturday morning, with a cruel sort of brightness illuminating the lie that the Carter household had become. The house was no longer a home, it was a stage set constructed with panicked money and desperate hope. White silk ribbons adorned the banisters and massive bouquets of lilies tried to mask the lingering scent of anxiety that hung in the air like cigarette smoke. Waiters in crisp white uniforms moved silently through the halls, polishing crystal glasses that would soon be filled with $1,000 champagne. To an outsider, it looked like the pinnacle of success and family unity. To me, it looked like a golden cage built by two people who had forgotten that birds eventually find a way to fly. Jason was the ringmaster of this circus. He was wearing a midnight blue tuxedo that fit him like a second skin, the lapels shimmering under the chandelier lights. He moved with a manic energy, checking the placement of the hors d'oeuvres and straightening the silverware. But I saw the tremor in his hands. I saw the way his eyes darted to the front door every 10 seconds, expecting the Russian mob to burst in before the guests arrived. And I saw something else. As he adjusted his jacket, I saw the outline of something hard and angular in his inner breast pocket. It was not a phone. It was too heavy. It was a folding knife. The realization turned my blood to ice. He was not taking any chances. If the senile old man decided not to sign, or if the plan went sideways, Jason was prepared to do something permanent. He had crossed the line from fraud to potential murder, and he didn't even realize that I was watching him cross it. I stood in the guest bathroom, staring at my reflection in the mirror. I had shaved clean for the first time in a week, scraping away the stubble of the confused dementia patient I had been playing. I put on my own suit, the charcoal gray one I had worn to Beatrice's retirement party 10 years ago. It was a little loose around the waist, now stress having eaten away at my appetite, but it still made me look like Douglas Carter, the man who built skyscrapers, not the victim who built a tragedy. I smoothed my silver hair back and straightened my tie. The face looking back at me was hard and unyielding. The grief was still there, buried deep, but it was armored now. I opened the door and walked out into the hallway. Natalie was there, screaming at a florist about the shade of the hydrangeas. When she saw me, she stopped mid-shout. Her eyes widened. For a second, she didn't see the helpless father. She saw the man who had raised her, the man who demanded respect. But then the greed took over again. "Oh, Daddy," she gushed, rushing over to fix my collar. "You look so handsome, like a movie star. Are you ready for your big night? Are you ready to sign the papers and be a hero?" I looked down at her, at the daughter who had mortgaged my life to buy a dress. I smiled a slow, vacant smile, letting the intelligence fade from my eyes just enough to comfort her. "I am ready, Princess," I said, my voice soft. "I just want everyone to be happy. I want to give you the gift." Jason walked over, his hand instinctively going to the pocket with the knife. He clapped me on the shoulder a little too hard. "That is the spirit, Dad," he said, his eyes dead and cold. "Let us get this over with. The guests will be here in an hour. Just remember the script, sign the papers, smile for the camera, and then you can go rest." I nodded, allowing them to lead me toward the living room like a prize calf to the slaughter. They thought the show was about to begin. They thought they were the directors of this play. They had no idea that I had rewritten the ending. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of expensive lilies and impending justice. It was time. Showtime. The doorbell began to ring in a ceaseless rhythm, announcing the arrival of the cast for our final act. The foyer filled with the murmur of voices, the clinking of crystal, and the heavy scent of expensive perfume mixing with the aroma of roasted beef. Jason was in his element. He moved through the crowd with the frantic energy of a man who believes he has just outrun an avalanche. He had one hand clamped firmly on my shoulder, parading me around the room like a prize poodle at a dog show. He introduced me to real estate developers and hedge fund managers, men whose hands were soft and whose smiles were sharp. "This is Douglas," he boomed, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "The man who started it all. The silent partner. We are finally merging our assets tonight. It is a historic moment for the family." He was lying with such conviction that I almost admired his performance. He was painting a picture of intergenerational wealth and unity, while the knife in his pocket pressed against his ribs. But what Jason failed to notice in his arrogance was the composition of the audience. He was so busy looking at the reflection of his own success in the eyes of his sycophants that he didn't see the sharks swimming in the punch bowl. I saw them. Near the French doors leading to the patio stood three men who looked decidedly out of place among the silk dresses and tuxedos. They wore leather jackets over t-shirts, and their noses looked like they had been broken more than once. They were the debt collectors, the muscle for the gambling ring. Jason spotted them and gave a nervous wave, thinking they had come to collect their money quietly after the signing. He didn't know I had sent them VIP invitations promising a public settlement. They weren't here to collect quietly. They were here to witness the payout or break his legs in front of the string quartet. And then there were the others. Standing by the bar, nursing a club soda, was a man in a brown corduroy jacket who looked like a retired geography teacher. But I knew better. That was Sheriff Mike, and the two men flanking him weren't waiters. They were plainclothes deputies. Mike caught my eye over the rim of his glass. He didn't smile. He just gave a barely perceptible nod, a signal that the perimeter was secure and the cavalry was inside the walls. Jason steered me toward a young couple standing awkwardly near the buffet. It was the Millers, the people who had bought my house for $600,000. They looked confused, holding their champagne flutes like foreign objects. Jason didn't even recognize them. He brushed past them, treating the owners of my stolen home like wedding crashers. He was blind. He was so focused on the $2 million imaginary check that he couldn't see the prison bars closing in around him. The room was a powder keg packed with every person he had lied to, every person he owed, and every person who wanted him in handcuffs. And he was walking around, lighting matches, thinking he was the star of the show. I took a sip of my sparkling cider and waited. The audience was seated. The curtain was about to rise. The string quartet faded into a respectful silence as Jason tapped a silver spoon against his crystal champagne flute. The sharp, clear chime cut through the murmur of the crowd like a command. The room turned to face us. I stood in front of the marble fireplace, the heat from the gas logs warming the back of my legs, while the rest of me felt cold as stone. Jason stood beside me, a predatory grin plastered across his face. In one hand, he held the sheaf of legal documents that would supposedly transfer $2 million into his control. In the other, he held a gold fountain pen, uncapped and ready. He thrust a wireless microphone into my hand, his fingers digging into my palm with a warning pressure. "It is time, Dad," he whispered through his teeth. "Make it good." I gripped the microphone. It felt heavy, cold, and mechanical. I looked out at the sea of faces. I saw the greedy anticipation in the eyes of Jason's gambling cronies. I saw the confusion in the eyes of the young couple who bought my house. I saw the steely resolve in the eyes of Sheriff Mike standing near the back. And then I looked at Natalie. She was standing in the front row, her sequined dress shimmering under the chandelier, her hands clasped together in a posture of false piety. She looked beautiful. She looked like the little girl I used to carry on my shoulders. I cleared my throat, and the sound echoed through the speakers, causing a brief feedback whine that made everyone flinch. I remember the winter of 1988. I began my voice low and steady. It was the year Natalie turned 6. We had a blizzard that year. The snow was 4 feet deep. The power went out for 3 days. Beatrice and I, we did not have much money back then. We huddled in the living room, burning our own furniture in the fireplace just to keep the baby warm. I looked at Natalie and saw her smile falter slightly. This was not the speech she had written for me. I worked double shifts for 20 years. I continued letting my gaze sweep across the room. I broke my back pouring concrete. I froze my hands framing houses in the rain. I did it all for one reason: to make sure my little girl never had to be cold again, to make sure she never had to be hungry. I thought that if I gave her everything, she would grow up to be kind. I thought that if I filled her life with comfort, she would fill my life with love. Jason stepped closer, the pen shaking in his hand. "Okay, Dad," he hissed, barely audible to the mic. "Wrap it up. Sign the papers." I ignored him. I took a step forward, addressing the room directly. "We are gathered here tonight to sign over a trust fund. $2 million. A fortune that can fix mistakes. A fortune that can pay off debts. A fortune that can buy flights to Mexico." I saw Jason freeze. I saw the color drain from his face as the specific details hit him like physical blows. I turned to look at my son-in-law and then at my daughter. My voice dropped to a whisper, but in the silent room it sounded like thunder. "But as I look at you two tonight, standing here in your stolen house wearing your stolen clothes, I realized something important. I realized that my hard work could buy you a lot of things. It could buy you education. It could buy you safety. It could buy you this party. But there are some things that even $2 million cannot buy. For instance, it cannot buy a conscience. And it certainly cannot buy you freedom from what is about to happen next." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small black remote control. Jason frowned, thinking it was part of the wire transfer process, but he did not move to stop me. I looked at him one last time, my eyes filled with a pity that was far colder than hate. "I told you I wanted to show everyone the truth," I said softly. I pointed the remote at the massive projection screen that had been set up to display the bank transfer details, and I pressed the red button. The room went dark as the lights dimmed automatically. The screen flickered to life. But instead of the logo of the Sovereign Trust or a bank account number, a grainy black and white image filled the wall. It was the kitchen island, the very spot where we were standing now. The timestamp in the corner read yesterday. The audience watched in confused silence as Jason appeared on screen. He looked nervous, looking over his shoulder, before pulling the orange prescription bottle from his pocket. The high-definition camera zoomed in digitally, a trick Larry had programmed earlier. Everyone in the room could clearly see him crushing the blue pills. Everyone could see him stirring the powder into the tomato soup. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. I saw the sheriff stiffen his hand, drifting toward his belt. But the video was not done. It cut to a split screen. On one side was Natalie standing in the hallway, her face twisted in a snarl. The audio came booming through the expensive surround sound speakers, crystal clear. "Is the old man dead yet? If he does not sign the pension release forms by tomorrow night, just do what you did to Mom." The Natalie standing in the front row let out a strangled cry, her hands flying to her mouth. She looked around frantically, but the eyes that met hers were filled with revulsion. The women who had been admiring her dress were now looking at her like she was a monster. Then came the final clip. The basement. The camera panned over the damp concrete floor, the dirty mattress, and the bucket in the corner. It showed Beatrice, my wife, huddled under a thin blanket, shivering in the dark. It showed the lock on the door. It showed the prisoner of war camp they had built in their own home. "Turn it off," Jason screamed, his voice cracking with panic. He didn't look at the screen, he looked at the mobsters by the door, who were now staring at him with dark promises of violence. He realized in a split second that his life was over. The money was a lie, the debt was real, and the evidence was playing on a 20-foot screen. He lunged at me. His eyes were wild, his teeth bared like a trapped animal. He raised the hand holding the heavy fountain pen, aiming for my neck, intending to silence the witness. He never reached me. From the crowd of stunned guests, a figure moved with the blur of combat speed. It was Larry, the man Jason had dismissed as a grumpy electrician. He didn't tackle Jason. He simply stepped forward and hooked his heavy work boot behind Jason's sprinting ankle. It was a precise, calculated move. Jason's momentum betrayed him. He flew forward, his arms flailing, and hit the hardwood floor with a sickening thud, sliding face first to the feet of the sheriff. He groaned, trying to push himself up, but the wind had been knocked out of him. The room was deadly silent, broken only by the sound of the video playing on a loop, showing the pills dissolving in the soup over and over again. The show was over, and the curtain had just come down on their thefts. Jason lay on the floor, struggling to breathe, his expensive tuxedo bunching up around his neck like a strangling noose. He tried to scramble backward, crab walking away from me across the polished hardwood, but his back hit the solid, immovable wall that was Sheriff Mike. Mike did not offer him a hand up. He looked down at the man who had tormented his friend with a mixture of professional duty and personal disgust. He reached down to his belt and unclipped his handcuffs. The sound of the ratcheting metal was sharp and final, cutting through the stunned silence of the ballroom like a guillotine blade. Jason Mike said, his voice flat and heavy, "You have the right to remain silent. But honestly, son, after what we just watched on that screen, I think you have said enough." Mike grabbed Jason's wrist and twisted it behind his back, snapping the cuff into place. The cold steel bit into the skin, a physical confirmation that the game was truly over. But the police were the least of Jason's problems. From the shadows near the French doors, the three men in leather jackets stepped forward. They moved with the synchronized menace of a wolf pack. They did not care about the sheriff. They did not care about the law. They cared about their investment. The tall one, the man who had issued the deadline on the porch, walked right up to the police line, ignoring the deputies. He looked down at Jason, his eyes dark and empty like the barrel of a gun. "You promised us a payday tonight, Jason." The man rumbled, his voice vibrating in the floorboards. "You brought us here to watch a movie. We do not like movies. We like cash." He looked at me and then back at Jason. "We will be waiting for you. Inside or outside, it does not matter. We always collect." The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Jason whimpered. He knew what that meant. Prison would not be a sanctuary for him. It would be a hunting ground. I walked over to where my son-in-law was kneeling. I signaled for Mike to give me a moment. I wanted to look him in the eye one last time without the mask of the senile old man. I knelt down so our faces were level. I saw the confusion in his tear-filled eyes. He was still trying to calculate the angles, still trying to figure out where the money was. "Dad," he pleaded, a desperate whisper that sprayed saliva on my lapel. "The trust fund. Just tell them. Tell them about the $2 million. We can fix this. I can pay them if you just sign the papers." I smiled a genuine cold smile. It was the smile of a contractor who has just finished a demolition. I leaned in until my lips were inches from his sweating ear. "Jason," I whispered, "there is no trust fund. There never was. The Sovereign Trust is just a name I made up while I was eating your leftovers. It sounds nice, doesn't it? Like a king. But I am not a king, and you are not an heir. There is no $2 million. There is no safety net." I paused, letting the horror sink into his brain like a slow poison. "But there is something real, Jason. This party, the lobster, the champagne, the string quartet playing Mozart. You signed the contracts. You put your name on the dotted line for the caterers and the florists because you thought you were rich." I patted his cheek gently one last time. "You owe $50,000 for this party, Jason. And you have no job, no house, and no way to pay. You didn't just dig your own grave. You financed the funeral." I stood up and buttoned my jacket, turning my back on him. "Take him away, Mike. I have a wife to find." The gavel came down with a sound like a rifle shot echoing through the mahogany-paneled courtroom and sealing the fate of the man who had tried to erase my existence. The trial had been swift. The video evidence Larry and I had collected was irrefutable. The jury did not need days to deliberate. They needed less than an hour to look at the footage of the poisoned soup and the basement dungeon and decide that Jason was a monster. The judge, a stern woman with glasses perched on her nose, looked at Jason with open contempt. She sentenced him to 15 years in a maximum security penitentiary. The charges were attempted murder, fraud, and elder abuse. I watched as the bailiffs clicked the handcuffs onto his wrists. Jason did not look at me. He was staring at the floor, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He knew that prison was not just a loss of freedom. For him, it was a death sentence. The news of his debts had spread, and the people he owed money to had long reaches that extended well behind prison bars. He was walking out of a courtroom and into a nightmare of his own making. I felt no joy in seeing him go, only a heavy, grim sense of closure. The wolf had been caught, and the flock was finally safe. Natalie's punishment was different, but perhaps even more painful for a woman of her vanity. She stood before the bench, tears streaming down her face, begging for leniency, claiming she was coerced by her husband. But the audio recordings told a different story. They told the story of a woman who was impatient for her parents to die. She avoided prison time by turning state's witness against Jason, but she could not escape the financial ruin she had courted. The judge ordered her assets liquidated to pay restitution. Her house, her car, her expensive clothes, everything was seized, and I did the rest. I sat down with Marcus Fairbanks, and we drafted a new will. I formally disinherited my daughter. Not a single penny of my hard-earned money would ever touch her palm again. The last I heard, she was working as a member of the cleaning staff at a shopping mall in downtown Seattle. The same mall where she used to spend thousands of dollars on handbags. She was now scrubbing the floors and emptying the trash cans of people who lived the life she used to take for granted. It was a harsh reality, but she had earned every blister on her hands. The final piece of the puzzle was my home. The fraudulent sale to the Millers was declared void ab initio, meaning it was invalid from the start. The law is clear that a forged signature conveys no title. The young couple was shaken, but the title insurance company made them whole and they moved on to find a house with less tragic history. I drove to the property on a Tuesday afternoon. The sun was shining on the brick facade and the oak tree stood tall in the yard. I walked up the porch steps, the same steps where I had been threatened with a shotgun weeks ago. I put my key in the lock. It turned smoothly. The door opened. I walked inside and the smell hit me. It smelled of lemon polish and old wood. It smelled of memories. It smelled of the life I had built with Beatrice. I walked through the empty rooms, running my hand along the walls, reclaiming the space. They had tried to sell this house to pay for their sins, but the house had rejected them. It was mine again. I stood in the center of the living room and let out a long breath that I felt I had been holding for a month. The silence was not empty. It was peaceful. I was home. The autumn sun hung low over the Seattle skyline, painting the clouds in soft washes of apricot and violet. It was a gentle light, the kind that warms your skin without burning it, and it felt like a benediction on our back porch. I sat in the wicker chair that Beatrice had recushioned herself, watching the steam rise from 3 porcelain cups on the low table. It had been exactly 1 year since the party. 1 year since the police lights flashed in the driveway, and the curtain fell on the darkest chapter of our lives. The silence that surrounded us now was not the heavy, fearful silence of a house holding its breath. It was the comfortable, easy silence of peace. Larry sat across from us, looking strangely domestic without his tool belt or his camouflage jacket. He was wearing a simple wool sweater, holding his teacup, with a delicacy that belied the lethal strength in his hands. He took a sip and nodded approvingly at Beatrice. "This is good blend, Mrs. Carter," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Bergamot." Beatrice smiled, and it was a real smile, one that reached her eyes and made them crinkle at the corners. "Thank you, Larry," she said. "It is Douglas's favorite." I watched her pour him a refill, her hand steady and strong. The tremors were gone. The bruises had faded long ago, leaving only the invisible scars that we both carried, but carried together. We were not the same people we were before. The legal war to reclaim our lives had been expensive. Marcus Fairbanks was a brilliant lawyer, but brilliance comes with a high hourly rate. We had to dip deep into our actual retirement savings to pay the court fees and the forensic accountants who untangled the mess Jason had made. We were driving a 5-year-old sedan now, instead of a new truck, and we clipped coupons for the grocery store. But as I looked around at my garden, where the chrysanthemums were blooming in defiant explosions of yellow and bronze, I realized I felt richer now than I ever had when my bank account was full. I looked at Larry, the man who had tackled a criminal to save a neighbor he barely knew. Then I thought about Natalie, the girl who shared my DNA, who had plotted my death to pay for a vacation. I used to believe that blood was the strongest bond in the world. I used to think that family was a title granted by birthright, an unbreakable covenant written in genetics. I was wrong. Blood is just biology. It is a roll of the dice. Family is something else entirely. Family is the people who spot you when you are limping. Family is the people who break into a house to install cameras because they know you are in trouble. Family is the neighbor who sits on your porch and drinks tea, not because he wants your money, but because he enjoys your company. I reached out and took Beatrice's hand. Her skin was soft against mine, paper thin, but warm with life. She squeezed back a silent communication that said we made it. We survived. I looked at Larry and raised my cup in a silent toast. We had lost a daughter and a son-in-law, but we had gained a brother. The wind rustled through the oak tree, the same tree I had planted 30 years ago, shaking loose a few golden leaves that drifted down to the grass. We were older. We were poorer. We were scarred. But as I took a sip of the hot tea and felt the warmth spread through my chest, I knew the truth. We were free. And that was worth more than $2 million. The tragic saga of the Carter family serves as a powerful reminder that the richest life is not built on gold, but on trust. Greed is a blinding poison that can turn children against parents and transform a warm home into a cold prison. Douglas showed us that while you can steal a man's house, you cannot steal his dignity or his resolve. Ultimately, this story proves that blood does not make a family, loyalty does. We must cherish those who protect us in our darkest hours, regardless of genetics, for they are the only true wealth we possess in this life. If you believe that justice always finds a way, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories of resilience and truth.